Hello, everyone. Welcome to Challenging Your Status Quo, the go-to podcast for those seeking success that resonates on every level. Our guide on this journey to success is J.A. Dava, co-founder of Latreia Coaching and Consulting. Each episode, we challenge you to step outside your comfort zone in redefining holistic success. Because in order to truly excel, one must rise in all aspects of life: spiritual, physical, relational, and philanthropical. So buckle up. Let's explore how your vocation and well-being can harmonize perfectly. And give a warm welcome to the host of Challenging Your Status Quo, J.A. Dava.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is J.A. Dava with Latreia 360, and welcome to Challenging Your Status Quo. Extremely excited to be doing today's show because today we're not only covering a really important topic. Today's topic, guys, as you well know, we always start the show by talking about something vocationally, something that can help you just kind of add a little more pep to your step today. But then we flow right into one of the other well-beings, because we absolutely believe in the Challenging Your Status Quo, that to be vocationally successful is just part of it. It's not the fullness of it. Holistically, I believe that you should be always concerned about other well-beings in your life as you're working towards your success vocationally. So vocational success wrapped around, here are the 5 things, right, guys? So we got spiritual well-being, we got relational well-being, we have physical well-being, we have mental well-being, and then we have philanthropical well-being. We believe at Challenging Your Status Quo that around vocation, wrapped up around that, you can't help but become holistically successful. And that success is far deeper than bringing the paycheck home. And today, it's going to be slightly different because I think this gentleman that I'm going to have on can cover all 6 well-beings, by the way. Okay, but we're gonna concentrate on a very specific topic because most of us know that AI is such an important topic today. And again, I'm not going to talk about AI, although that is a concentration that we at Latreia 360 are concentrating on. But there's this other side of it that we absolutely believe belongs in the conversation with AI. I don't believe that you can focus on AI without bringing another 2 letters into play, and that is called EQ, the emotional quotient. And those 2 go hand in hand. Our guest is not only someone who, he's an incredible person to begin with, but he's one of my best of friends. We've been friends for a long time. And it's funny because we were really naive when we first started this journey together, and it's wonderful to see us pre-kids, with kids, raising kids, putting them through college, then becoming empty nesters, and now really waiting for that grandparent thing, but neither of us are there yet. But anyways, when that time comes, that'll be another stage in life. But Eric Pennington is a dear friend. You will love this guest because he is the managing partner of a company called Spirit of EQ. Now, he's got a tremendous journey along the way prior to getting there. So I'm going to go ahead and bring him on right now. His name is Eric Pennington, and he is the managing partner with the Spirit of EQ. Eric Pennington, how are you, man? This is Challenging Your Status Quo, and thank you so much for being on our show. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Oh, man. You know what? This is a long time coming, Eric.
I know all the plans we made, and here we are, right?
Yeah, you said something, by the way, in the green room, right? Well, before we came on, you said something that really was fascinating to me anyways. And that is you and I have probably had, because this is our first, I was on your podcast, which I was so happy to have been invited to that. So that was our first podcast together. And this is really our second podcast together. But in reality, in life itself, Eric, how many podcasts have we been through? right?
At least a million.
At least a million, right? And so all the way, I still remember thinking, are we equipped to have kids? I just remember doing that. And, but anyways, Eric,
Somewhere in time, Jay, there was a recording. So I'm sure there's probably a million episodes somewhere.
yeah. Well, I have a feeling that when we get to heaven, brother, I know you're heading there. So when we do get there, I think there's gonna be a lot of film we'll be watching. We'll just have a
Yeah,
good old laugh about it, right? Because we thought we knew
absolutely.
so much. And but Eric, man, there's a lot of people listening, and these people just want to hear a little bit about your journey before we really get started. Because Spirit of EQ, that is your company with
Mhm.
other partners as well. But I will tell you that uh, you weren't always self-employed, and
No.
but can you tell us a little bit? Tell our audience who you are, Eric, starting from like when you and I first met.
Sure. Well, you and I first met, it was in the banking world, specifically mortgage banking. And previous to that, and I think this is important, I always get a little bit of a chuckle to myself. There was a time in my life where I wanted to be a musician full time. My dream was I was going to be the bass player for Santana, right? And I remember I used to work at a record store during my musician days, and I would just so defiantly and arrogantly tell people, because we had a bank that was like right behind our store, and I would point to it and say, "You see that place? I'm never going to be working at a bank. That's not me. That's not who I am, and I'm not selling out that way." And of course, where was the bulk of my career? It was almost if there was there was a group of angels right around just kind of laughing, going, wait till he sees what's going to happen next. So by extension, the bank that I was pointing to was the bank that you happened to be working at and I was working at. That's when
Yeah.
we first met, right?
Oh,
So yeah, so that was the entrance. And I mean, I mean, by that time I had given up my idea that I was going to be this, famous or well acclaimed musician. And I had a family, or I was newly married, and I did what I thought was, you know, take care of your family, pay the bills, and settle in and find something. And I would tell you, and I think you would agree, we worked around some really good people where we were at, and that's what made it a thrill ride for me, was the people. I really wasn't that interested in numbers. I mean, I could do it, and I did it, but
it's
the
boring
thing that
stuff, right,
definitely,
Eric? It's
yeah. Well, uh, no offense to those that really fall in love with APRs, but uh, for me, that wasn't the juice. That wasn't the thing
yeah,
that made me come alive. And quite frankly, I think it was probably one of the early seeds that was planted in me to do the work that I'm doing today, and that's a love of people. So to kind of keep the flow of my journey there, I just continued to grow in that world. I mean, from starting as a loan officer and moving to different companies and becoming and getting into management, executive management. And one of the things that happened to me along the way, Jay, was I had what I tell people was my Solomon moment, where I had achieved everything that I was told I should just be super ecstatic to achieve. And I found myself kind of bored, uh, not fulfilled, because it wasn't doing for me what had been advertised to me, right? So I began this crossroads of, well, then what's next? And by that time, I was well past being a young man, and I had kids, and been married for a long time. And it was really that exploration about, well, what could be next? And that little seed that I mentioned about the love of people had blossomed into this thing where I thought, well, maybe I could do something on my own and do something with all the knowledge I had gained and all of the experience, and to help people to live a better, more vibrant life, right? But the reality is, I didn't know anything about entrepreneurism. I thought I did, but I didn't. Corporate America didn't prepare me to be an entrepreneur. Actually, in many ways, it it was a handicap. But I felt the call, and I took the leap. And that began the story of entrepreneurism, right?
Hmm.
And that was probably going on 15, 20 years ago,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
That's the first sign of aging, by the way. It's when you
I
can
think
no
so.
longer really think back when you
Well,
start.
but JA, you must remember I did start my career at 5.
Hmm.
So, I mean,
This is
you know,
true.
these things are relative. You know, we were in kindergarten. You
Yeah.
remember,
Yeah.
sitting in our chairs. Thinking,
Everything we learned, right, was in kindergarten
right?
after all, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. So, along the way, though, my corporate career was a checkered one. I mean, there were some successes and all of that good stuff. And though it was a crossroads experience and coming to that, toward the end, um, all of it went into making me into who I am now,
hmm.
even the stuff I didn't like, even the stuff that was boring. I mean, at the time, no, you don't like dealing with it. You don't particularly enjoy it or whatever, but I can't deny it built something in me, and that was the thing that helped me endure the journey that has been entrepreneurism, because I think we over romanticize it in our culture, because they think that everybody can be an Elon Musk or a Mark Zuckerberg or fill in the blank, and the reality is so far different. And I don't mean to say that I don't think anybody else could do what those gentlemen did, but I'm saying the reality is the majority of entrepreneurs, that doesn't describe their journey. And our culture is such that it doesn't really spend a lot of time wanting to focus in on when you failed, when it's the third time you're trying an idea, when there's nobody around, there's no cameras, there's no podcast that says, oh my gosh, let's talk about that failure of that business idea you had. It's typically shied away from, even though, JA, again, it goes into building who you are, you know?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's kind of the story of my vocational journey. If I've left anything out, obviously,
Yeah, you
please
left a
ask
lot
me.
of things out, Eric. I mean, I think it's important because I think it is part of your story, and is that climbing the corporate ladder meant that you accomplished certain things in your life, and you were always, I mean, Eric, even though you started at 5 years old, you were always a top performer for the bank that
Right.
we worked at. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
one of the things that I continued to see throughout your career, and was you were always running at a very high pace, all
Hmm.
the way through. Eventually you ended up with another bank that you were an executive managing position, and you had a lot of major decisions. And one of the things that happened is that, and again, we're not talking about any specific company here because I think it fits into it, especially if you have an entrepreneurial spirit. Um, there is a side of you that kind of died along the way, and maybe it was because you had a calling for entrepreneurship. Um, and I just remember, because we've been such good friends, that things changed in you. Things, you didn't have that same joy. You didn't have that really. In fact, you were disheartened by what you were seeing inside of corporate America. And I remember you wrote a book, right? And you wrote a book about it and the experience that you had about it. And I remember reading it. I remember you gave me kind of a preview of it. And I remember saying to you, I said, "Man, you sound angry at the industry." you know and I said, but anyways, long story there is that you didn't rewrite the book, but it wasn't published at that point yet, so you adjusted it. But then I really saw your heart, right? I saw your heart in really about corporate America. I believe, Eric, that every single one of us, whether you're a loan officer, a manager inside of a mortgage company, you're a CEO of your own company within a company, as far as I'm concerned. And you should treat
Yeah.
it that way. You're an entrepreneur by heart. That just by saying I'm working, I hope that what you're doing vocationally is something that you feel in your passion and your spirit and everything else, right? And so, and that's what I saw in you. And I remember you making that switch, and it wasn't an easy switch for you, that
No.
transition from a financial, landfall, right? Because it was good, right? Life was good when you were sitting at that executive position, and
Yeah.
to leave that to start your own business is almost crazy to some people. But Tell me why, Eric. And again, I know I've never asked you this question, Eric, but tell me why it is that you actually decided that, you know what, all this money in this position, it's all good. I can't do it. I'm going to go this way. The entrepreneurial spirit. What really brought that on, Eric?
I heard my Lord's voice,
Hmm.
and it was as clear as a bell ringing. And for your audience, Jay, it's not this super romantic story made in Hollywood, because I also carried with me my own ideas of how it should look
Yeah, that's for
and
sure.
what I should do. And in some ways, I thought I was just going to bring him along on my journey, not realizing that he had set me up. And let me let me explain that in a way. When people hear "set me up," it seems like to fail, to deceive, but it wasn't that, because I don't think he would have got me to this new pathway without setting me up. Because as you said, Ja, I mean, things were good, really good, from appearance sake, right?
Yes.
And to leave all of that, I mean, you would have to have some kind of loud bell, some kind of voice, something that was just driving you inside to do something different. And what I found along the way was, and I'm not, how would I say this? I'm not even in the same galaxy as David. But if we know that story well enough, he was anointed king, and
Hmm.
then the bottom fell out for almost 14 years. I mean, he had his triumphs, right? Goliath, and there was some intermediate stuff, but it was a 14-year drop until he became king. And that's a positive story too, because he was being prepared for being a king. And I know, our culture again here in America, we don't like to talk about that. We think anoint him as king, get the throne room set up, and rule, man, until you die.
Yeah.
But that's not how we become the kind of people that I believe God wants us to be.
Yeah.
So, kind of back to my story, it was I heard it, and then again, I'm not in the same galaxy as David by any stretch, but it was really, really hard. I had pressures coming from a family side, which was rightful. I mean, it was like, hey, we have to pay bills, and I thought you were going to generate this money, and then I'm going, well, it didn't work out, but I'm working on something else, and then I felt like I was in this cycle of always saying, okay, just I got this thing, I got this new thing, I'm gonna try this thing, and all the while, it's like people are almost like Jay, the imagination of like when someone's watching, looking at their watch, like, okay, what time, when, and I was fully in at that point. There was no turning back, no going back to Egypt, if you will. And it really, it was one of those things I had to really focus in on. And this is that part about hearing that voice, because that same voice was the one that continually whispered in my ear, keep going.
Oh,
And quite frankly, Jay, I needed to hear keep going, because if you said to me, hey, there's this new business opportunity, or if someone said to me, hey, if you just take this course, or if you, that wasn't going to do it,
yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
nothing looked like I thought it was going to look.
You
So
know,
I needed that voice.
yeah, Eric, it's really interesting that you said David, right? And
Hmm.
it's interesting that you kept saying it, and you said it more than a couple of times. Um, I'm not like in the same league as like David. Neither was David, to be very honest with you,
Yes,
right?
you're right.
I mean, if you really think
That's a
about it,
great point.
yeah, I mean, David was not in the same league as the Davids we all know. And so your story, the only thing that's coming up in my mind is David's sling. In other words, it was going to be your weapon to affect the world, right?
Yeah,
And it's David's sling is really what made the difference. Wasn't
yeah.
The Lord used that instrument to make an even greater and bigger story than David's life, right?
Well, and JA, and I know your audience is diverse, and they may wonder
Yeah.
who's this guy and why is he talking about biblical characters and all that. You know me very well, and for your audience, I'm an open, authentic book.
Yeah.
I also like Miles Davis
Yeah.
tremendously. I love his music because that's part of who I am.
Yeah.
So I'm saying this not to teach anything, and to try to tell them this is what you should do. I'm just answering your question and giving you my heart because
Yeah.
that is the thing that I connected to. That was what I heard. That was what I chose to do. Right.
Yeah.
And to your point, if you are someone who's whether it's biblical history or world history, you're right. David was the least. And quite frankly, Jay, most people wouldn't have picked him
Right. His
because,
brother,
yeah,
everyone,
yeah,
everyone didn't choose him, right?
yeah,
And
exactly.
so, and I think that's some of the greatest things about people is that I think people are more equipped than they give themselves the credit for. Um,
Certainly.
and and I do know that of you, Eric, that it really isn't about you as much as you've said a couple things there where hey, I had to do this, I had to do this, but I know deeply that there's a calling in this. So I love how you said, I heard my Lord's voice and he was calling.
Mhm.
He was calling. He was calling you into what I now consider spirit of EQ. And honestly, Eric, I was one of your friends that sat here and I went, oh no, it's a tree hugging thing. Um, I mean, let's just call it for what it is. I'm thinking to myself,
Yeah.
really, Eric? Eric goes there? Eric wouldn't even wear Dockers for goodness sake, right? I mean, you were the most put together. You and I would joke about that all the time. That someday when
Yeah.
I start
Yeah.
seeing you wearing Dockers, I know that the world's coming to an end at that point. But but for you to be talking about EQ because you were so focused and so driven, and you were always the best at what you did to all of a sudden go there and all of a sudden you're talking about the emotional side of life. So let's go there, man, because this
Mhm.
has now become your calling. That voice must have really spoken to you. So I want to step back for a second because just like me, I just said it. It's like when you said it to me the first time, I went, "Oh no, Eric's become like a tree hugger." I mean, he's like talking about the science of relationships and what the emotions and all of those kind of stuff. That's not the Eric I know. So Eric, let's pivot right now. EQ. Gosh, tell me about that journey that you just want put us through to where it is today with EQ and that transition. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I'll draw it back to, again, the people equation for me. And I believe that was planted in me, that love of people, the desire to help them to move to a more vibrant life, right? So I'd been, in the entrepreneur journey, everything had turned into, well, how do I help them to discover? How do I help them to break through? How do I help them to live a better life? And, it didn't always land inside of the EQ side of the equation, but it was always motivated that way, right? What is it that people need? What is it that can help them? And somewhere, I'm going to say it was probably around 2017, 2018, I was introduced more formally to emotional intelligence. And, you know, obviously in America, when we start talking about emotions, it creates these images of, we have tissues and we're crying about, the dog that died when we were 8 and, my wife and the romance. And it's just touchy feely, as we might call it. Right.
Right.
But what I discovered when looking past the front door of it, it's deeply ingrained in science. It's part of how we are made as human beings, the way that our brain operates. And I use this example when I'm doing sessions is that every human being, every single day, all of us are encountering all types of events. Some of them are expected, some are unexpected, some we like, some we don't like, but they're happening. Every event that we encounter kicks off a thought, which is followed by an emotion. And then there's a decision we make. And it's a rinse and repeat. And it's not a case of where we are sort of, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's not that we're not in control of it so much, because our brain is operating and doing its job, right?
Right.
So here's an example. Let's say you and I are going on a hike and we're in Yosemite National Park, right? It's a great hike, sunny day. All of a sudden, you see a grizzly bear, and the grizzly bear is moving slowly toward us. That's the event. The thought is, that's a grizzly bear, that's dangerous. The emotion, fear, apprehension, fill in the blank, and then you and I are going to make a choice. I might decide to react in that exact second and say, I'm out of here, J.A., run. J.A., you may have more familiarity with how grizzly bears operate. You take a few seconds, not a ton, and you say, Eric, no. Running is an invitation to that bear. We have to stand still. How we manage the various events, and I get it, the grizzly bear example is very extreme, but call it when you're in traffic on a freeway and somebody cuts you off, or when your son or daughter says, you know what, I'm not coming home for the holidays, even though 2 weeks ago they promised that they would. Fill in the blank, that's typically the process. So what we found was, the better we are at managing that process, the better our performance, the better our results. Fill in the blank. And just for your listeners, for your audience, think of it in terms of, again, from a work perspective, vocational, right? When you're in that team meeting on Monday morning and your boss delivers some kind of news that maybe perturbs you, if you react in the moment from that event, you're probably going to make a decision that's not going to be optimal. The higher your emotional intelligence is, and it is a learnable skill, that's very important, the better you are at handling, and you become more of a responder versus a reactor.
Yeah. So it's I mean, Eric, for so long, we are told, as human beings, really, as men even more so, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, like, don't cry, don't get all emotional about that. You're not, I mean, athletes are told that, right? I mean, all the time. Like,
Yeah. What's the classic statement? Keep the emotions leave the emotions out.
Right. Keep it in check.
Yeah.
Don't let them see the whites of your eyes, that type of a thing.
Yeah.
And so forever, that was something that we just kind of learned, especially as men, to kill, to just kind of put aside.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Why all of a sudden is EQ making a comeback? And I do call it a comeback because it has become more and more important, and it's an actual topic of conversations for people today, is the EQ side of it. So, Eric, why is it all of a sudden such a big deal?
I think probably one of the greatest catalysts was the pandemic that we experienced back in 2020, because it exposed some weaknesses in areas that we hadn't really paid a lot of attention to. Because all of a sudden, all of the old solutions were no longer working, right? And for so long, we had relied on, maybe for lack of a better way of describing it, the left side of our brain, the intellectual, the analytical side. And it produced tremendous results. No one could argue against that. But all of a sudden, the pandemic exposed us to problems that the analytical wasn't going to be able to solve. And I won't rehash all of the circumstances and situations from that window of time, but I think it made it very clear to many that we have to find other tools to be able to address these new problems that we either ignored or never saw before, right?
Yeah.
So I think it opened up a willingness to listen and to hear. I'm fortunate to be in the space where I could do that in such a way that was, how would I describe it, where organizations felt safe, that I wasn't going to come in and talk about, hey, everybody, touchy feely, where are the tissues, let's watch a movie. I mean, whatever you would describe it as, the stuff that would sort of make people recoil. And we were successful in doing that. And I think it was embraced because they could see. And the other part of it was we got results.
Yes.
I mean, we would make it very clear this is hard work because you're rewiring your brain, you're building a practice, you're doing something new and different. But without fail, what we found in our work is the only people that didn't find success with it were those that weren't willing to put in the work. It wasn't intelligence. It wasn't the willingness to put in the work, right? So I think that openness sort of mainstreamed this thing called emotional intelligence, or EQ. And quite frankly, and I know you're going to touch on it today, I think AI has made it even more mainstream now. And there's some really compelling reasons for that. But that's basically how it played out, at least in my mind.
Well, Eric, you bring up something that has become such a big focus for Latreia because, as a coach and a consultant, one of the things that I have the privilege of doing is just being able to discover what people are going through in today's world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not training them the ABCs and XYZs of what they're supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be taking what they already know and trying to really draw it out of them and making it that much more effective for them.
Yeah.
Well, the AI world has come into play, right? The AI world has come into play. And in my basic understanding of AI, Eric, is that there are people out there right now that absolutely believe, they're fearful of it, they're excited about it, but so many of them really honestly feel that what it does is that it brings them to an even playing field with those people that are highly educated and highly analytical and because they can just plug in information and get information out very, very quickly. And I'm a believer of that, by the way. I love how AI makes things so available for people.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's the intellect level of it, right? And so, in other words, you and I both know, and here I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about, Eric, but, this is your field much more than it's mine. But I do know that when we were growing up and people were trying to quell the so-called emotional side of us, it was a big mistake, right? Because when the first thing that happens in all of our lives is that whatever event, as you called it, right? Whatever it is that stimulates you, the very first place it's going to go through in your brain is going to be the emotional side before it ever gets into the frontal lobe, which is now the intellect side, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yet, most people manage and run their businesses or run employees because they absolutely believe that they're more intelligent than the people that work for them.
Mm-hmm.
And what AI is doing is evening out that playing field, the intellect part of that. And I'm not advocating that that's exactly what it does. That somebody in Harvard and somebody who's in AI is the same level, but the perception of the fact that that information can be had that quick, the intellect level of that can be there is great. So everyone's diving into it and everyone thinks it's a really good thing. But Eric, you know what? I coach an awful lot of people. And one of the things I'm seeing very quickly is that you think you're managing, but honestly, you're missing a whole boat because you're missing the emotional side of it.
Yeah.
And that's where it runs through before it ever gets into the intellect level. That's how important it is. So if we get a hold of that emotional side as it's working its way into the intellect side of us, how much better off are we going to be? So being the expert on EQ, am I touching? Am I beginning the understanding of that?
Yeah, I think you're tracking well because, the reality of AI in my mind is that it is a disruptor, and no one would argue
Yes.
that it differently. I would believe, but the one thing about that disruption is that the access to the information, the access to solutions to problems and efficiencies and continuous improvement, whatever you want to throw in, is such that it's no longer so dependent upon the human intellect, right? And I think that connects to what you're saying about evening the playing field, if you will, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I am not into the hyperbole of, oh my gosh, they're going to be mass layoffs and people will no longer have a job. And that's great for Hollywood, but I don't believe that that's what is the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is, will we have leaders that have strong spiritual and emotional health and have honed the skills related to those so that they can lead in a new era where, yeah, it's great that you have all that intellectual knowledge and wouldn't want to throw it away, but there's no denying that that's not what we're leveraging anymore, right? And I think we're confident, which, by the way, that was sort of the motivation for naming the company Spirit of EQ, because we knew there's a spiritual component and there's an emotional component. And those two areas are vital in the world in which we're heading. That, yes, to many degrees is unknown. But Jay, I'll just use this analogy, and I've used it before about this idea of AI, right? So let's say that from a strength perspective, you've been for years relying on the strength of your arms, right? Your biceps, your triceps, your forearms, because the work you did required that, needed it every day, day in and day out, right? So maybe someone said to you, yeah, you probably should pay attention to your legs too. It's important for those muscles to be developed and strong because there's another part of your body. And JA, I think what we did as a society is we said, legs, yeah, maybe I'll get to that next month. I'm going to look up a workout plan or something, but right now I got to focus on my arms because, hey, we got this project, we got this situation, right? Well, a knock on the door. Hi, I'm Mrs. AI. We don't really need your arms as much anymore because I can do that. And I think what it's doing, it's leaving leaders flat-footed because they haven't been working the muscle that needs to be worked in order to, in a new world, right? Now, I feel that's great opportunity. And obviously for our company and the work we do, we love it because we can say, hey, we have tools, we have solutions that can help you grow that muscle. Not guaranteeing anything. You're going to have to put in the work, but there are ways in which you can develop that muscle. And again, we believe that's that spiritual and emotional side of ourselves that will drive that particular growth, because that's going to be what's needed from leaders in the future ahead.
Yeah, you know what, Eric? It's so true because you know what? In our industry, both yours and my past industry, in the mortgage area, you were an exception to that rule, by the way. But I also believe I know the source of why you were an exception to that rule. And that is an awful lot of people in our industry are elevated because they were great salespeople. They were great at selling, and then they make them into managers.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of them fail. And there's some people listening to this right now and they're going, I'm kind of there. And honestly, I believe it is because they don't know how to be empathetic. They don't know how to coach. They might be able to train how to write an FHA, VA, whatever it is, right? But they don't know how to coach. They don't know how to be empathetic. They don't know how to care for the folks. I mean, do you see that?
It's
stepping into EQ.
It is. With our clients, it's one of the major issues. They don't articulate it always in the form of what we're talking about. They just know they got a problem because X leader can't keep eye contact with a person who's dealing with a difficult issue, or this person doesn't have enough self-awareness to know that, hey, when you just turn around and walk away, it gives the impression of X, Y, and Z. And this could be someone who technically is unmatched, right? Yeah. So they know they have a problem, and again, we meet our clients where they're at. So it's like, okay, let's address it. Let's figure it out. Let's do an assessment, see where everything is at, on and on and on. But JA, I think in many respects, this idea of, what do you do when the person that you are talking to, this is the second conversation about the same problem, whether it be a client issue, not responding in a timely manner to an email or a phone call, whatever it may be, are you the kind of leader that can see past the facade? Can you read the room?
Yeah.
Can you look at that employee of yours and go, you know, I always notice that Eric is always fidgety when we start talking about this stuff. Do you know the signs of when you should say, hold on, I'm not going to talk about the technical issue. I'm going to talk about, okay, Eric, why don't you tell me a little more about what's been going on in your life? What's been stressing you out so that I can
Yeah.
get to the heart of things? But if you don't have the emotional muscle, the spiritual muscle, and by the way, Jay, I know you know this. When I'm talking spiritual, I'm not talking about a religion, right? But do you have the spiritual and the emotional muscle to be able to pivot and go, the technical is not going to help me here. I got to be able to understand more about where this person is at.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such a big deal, Eric. So, Eric, I just came out of a men's group this morning where there's these four things, and you know to live your life, and it was resist passivity,
Mhm.
accept responsibility, lead courageously, invest internally, right?
Mm.
And I think that that's one of the things. All of a sudden, that invest internally is really sticking out with what you just said, right? Investing in that internal power that you have inside of you, what brought you there. So many people have forgotten what has elevated them to certain positions they're in, whether they're a top producer or whether or not they're a manager, whether or not they're just being a good family man, right? Is that and it could run the whole gamut. Is that you know investing internally and finding that grounding inside of you becomes very important, Eric. So based on what because it's such a big deal, because AI is such a big deal, and EQ truly needs to be embraced, Eric. Based on what you're seeing out there, you got people listening to this show going, "How do I begin to bridge that? What should I do, Eric? How do I even begin to start getting a hold of that?
Yeah,
What's
great
the
question, Jay. I think if you're talking about an individual who just basic human being, I tuned into the show, I'm living my life, maybe I'm a leader, manager, executive, whatever it may be. I got two kids and on and on and on, whatever the bio would be, is that I think it's beginning the journey of learning and begin the journey of research. I mean, there are books out there. There are podcasts. Obviously, Jay, we have a podcast. It's rooted around educating people around this thing we call emotional intelligence and spiritual emotional intelligence. I think it can get more formal, and more formal obviously implies that there may be cost involved. And I know we have clients that have us on retainer and they use us for various things, whether it's with groups or with individuals, and there's a fee related. If you're in that spot, certainly, I do recommend pacing yourself. I hopefully nobody in your audience thinks that I'm predicting the end of the world and you better rush out because doom and
sure?
gloom and all that. I think slow, deliberate progress is what you're after. And again, find your pace and build upon that. And some of that pace will be determined by your budget. It'll be determined about, what access you have to information and all of the above. But it really begins with start. And I would say this as a warning. You may dismiss me, my background, my company. They may even dismiss you, JA, as you're just a podcast host, and we really love JA. But do not ignore this, because there will be a day when you're going to need that muscle. And if you don't have it at the moment you need it, you got nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And I, I,
Yeah.
I, I just think that, I'm especially concerned in the United States because we have so much prosperity here that sometimes we take it for granted. And we take it for granted in this way, Jay. We tell ourselves these stories like, yeah, that was a great idea, but I think I'm good. I'm gonna go, and then another day goes by and we go, well, yeah, I know, I probably should read that book. Another week, another month. Yeah, he mentioned that podcast, and Jay had another podcast with someone talking about, but I just really love listening to Jay anyway. He's a great guy, but yeah, I'm going to one day maybe. And this prosperity, I think, is convincing us that we're in a stronger position than we are, because one day there'll be the knock on the door and you'll need the resources. And that's kind of where I think it lands. So the important thing is start and build progress.
Well, so it's funny, Eric, because I was talking about CRMs with a company recently, and I said CRMs are non-negotiable, and one of their managers piped in and said, "So is AI. It is no longer. It's a non-negotiable aspect of your business," and it just rolled out of me that, yeah, but you better have your emotional quotient in place if you're going to head that way, right? And he goes, JA, EQ, what would that do for my business? I mean, statistically, Eric. So let's get analytical for just a sec, right?
Yep.
We've got an audience here that thinks that there's, it's nice because you got to be nice. I mean, and I'm already kind of nice, and they're thinking that.
Yep.
From a business perspective, Eric, are you finding that people are succeeding even more because they get a hold of their whole emotional intelligence part of them?
Well, I mean, the short answer is yes, Jay. And I say that to say, and I'm more than happy to provide you for your show notes. I can cite tons of studies that show the performance metrics, but I kind of like to keep it, at least in the confines of a show, to some basics, right?
Yeah.
Let's just think of it in the terms of a customer facing situation, an important customer, right? One where there's a lot of money on the line. What type of person do you want interacting with that customer? One that has a good handle on managing their emotions, or one that says, I know exactly how to calculate APR and basis points? I can't speak for your audience, those that might be in that position, but I know for me, I want the one with the emotions, because the technical, I know I can get. I know I can get those answers. What's the basis points? What's the APR? Whatever you want
That's
to
the
use.
intellect, right?
Yeah.
That's the intellect.
Yeah.
Again.
And again, we talk about AI. You're going to tell me that you don't have an AI tool that can tell you and answer that question. But when you're sitting across from that customer that's scratching their head and kind of looking away, sending you signs that something's not right for me right now. If you're not able to engage, if you're not able to be empathetic, and it's more than just being a nice person.
Yeah.
It's a skill, right?
Yes.
So from that, and this is kind of important from our perspective in the work we do. We don't do like short term, let's meet for 1 month and have a nice day, right? We believe in the long term, because what we are advocating is building a practice, right? And a practice, in my mind, means, and I use him quite often in sessions as an example. Everybody knows, pretty much, if you're into sports, you know who Joe Burrow is, quarterback, right? And he's considered to be one of the elite, right? One of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Well, I guarantee you, when he first started picking up the football, it was clunky, and there were a lot of mistakes. And okay, got to do it again. Got to move your feet to the left, move them hips. You got to focus on your hips. But he kept working on it. He kept showing up. And the more that he worked on it, he got to a place where he's at now, where it's effortless. It doesn't mean that he didn't put anything in it, It means he prepared. It means he worked so that it could be effortless, right? But once again, I'd say, what kind of person do you want in front of your customers? The ones that have built a practice, not unlike maybe what Joe Burrow did. And I get it. That's the NFL. That's athletics. We're talking about, corporate, business. But you can see the connection, Jay. I want someone in front of my customer that when they see someone scratching their head and looking away, they go, okay, I know what's happening here. There's some doubt. Okay, I'm starting to feel anxious. No, I gotta calm myself because I need to be able to ask them a powerful question. Okay, JA, I noticed you're scratching your head and looking away. Can you tell me a little bit about what's on your mind right now? Let's set aside the project and all the rest. I just want to kind of get a sense. I might find, no guarantees. JA might say, well, Eric, I'm just really concerned about the economy and the budget, and I want to make sure that if we do this, it's going to lead to a greater X, Y, and Z. Thank you, JA, for telling me that. That helps. Now, what I will do is X, Y, and Z. But if I don't have the muscle, you know what I might do? Let me just close him. Let me just push him to, let's go to the close. Let's go to the close. Let's get him booked because he's kind of nervous and we don't let him get away. Sorry.
Wow.
Not optimal. So that's kind of when, if someone says to me, how's this going to make my business better? And yes, once again, Jay, I can provide you with documents for your audience if they want to look at studies and the stats and all day long. But the bread and butter is what we've been describing here, on the ground,
Well,
real time.
I honestly want them to reach out to you, Eric. And in fact, how do we get a hold of you, Eric?
Oh, sure. It's as simple as my email, and it's just eric@spiritofeq.com, or you can do a search and you'll find our company and all of the various places that we do what we do. But and I welcome that. More than happy to have a conversation, supply any type of information that might be helpful.
Would that be the best probably avenue, Eric, is for someone to reach out to you and just have a conversation with you first and foremost, and then
absolutely
take it from there?
Because Jay, we kind of live with the value of, we're in the attraction business. I'm not into moving people to do something just so it'll benefit us, because we want to work with people that want to do the work, right? Because we want them to get results. So from that perspective, having a conversation to learn more is absolutely it's certainly the best way to start.
Wow. Eric, you know what, man? You and I could continue to talk and talk and talk for not just the benefit of you and I, but also to the benefit of the people listening. I wish we could have this kind of conversation with everybody, correct? Because I love this. I love this kind of conversation because it excels people to such a different level. But we've been talking for 52 minutes already.
Right. Where does it go?
I know, right? And I mean, and there's so much more to honestly just be talking about, because we've just touched the surface. Obviously, with the spirit of EQ and where you're concentrating on, I just love the fact that you took a calling and you went with it, and and I know it's not been tough. I know it's been tough, I should say. It's not been easy, I should say, right? But it's so gratifying. To do this kind of work and to affect people the way that you are. And Eric, I've been privileged enough to be able to have you in my life for 30 years. That is how long it's been. We both started when we were 5.
Remember that.
Yeah. And so, but Eric, I would love to have you on the show again at a later time where we can continue on. I'm sure you've already affected so many people that are going to be listening to this. Spirit of EQ is really, look them up, Google them. Spirit of EQ is spelled exactly the way it is, as it sounds. You'll find Eric Pennington and his partners there. But find a way. Eric, what's a good closing word from you, brother?
My hope is that there'll be something that was said that would ignite a bit of a flame in your listeners, your audience, to just take the next step. And just take the next step. And I think that step will lead to the progress that leads to more momentum, and then there'll be another. That's the key.
Yeah. Eric Pennington, man, sorry I got to let you go now.
Well, thank you, Jay.
But thank you for your words. Thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for educating us a little bit on, again, the tip of the iceberg of what is called EQ. I truly believe, as important as AI is in people's world, and it is non-negotiable at this point, it is absolutely much more critical that you get a hold of the EQ side of you. And if you're one of these people that's sitting here wondering, oh, the emotional side, man, that's not me. It better be. It better be. Because if you are going to introduce people to the AI world, and you're not bringing in that emotional side of things, I think you're going to miss a real loud voice. So, Eric, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And I look forward to having you at another time. All right.
Sounds good.
So,
Thank you, Jay.
thanks, Eric, very much. All right, guys. So here it is. All right. So, we started the show with Eric, really kind of just talking about his journey and then being able to walk into exactly why he started his own business. And for that matter, started a business that even I was shocked that he was going into the emotional side, because Eric is he's focused. The emotional side isn't necessarily what I saw in a lot of Eric. And all of a sudden he's leading the charge. And, he asked a very important question, and that was, what's next? Remember when I asked him that question, and Eric, he just basically said, what's next? And then he heard the Lord's voice, right? How many of you guys hear that voice and don't pursue it? And by the way, when I say that, I don't mean to say that all of a sudden we all should become entrepreneurs and jump off the ship and stuff like that. Remember what I said? You are the CEO of your company within a company. So if that is what your calling is, that loud voice, here's the bottom line. Being able to answer a calling doesn't necessarily mean that you jump off and become an entrepreneur and that you got to start your own business and all of that. You can be a voice inside of a company, but who are you listening to is really important. What did he say? Even though he started it with what's next, what did he say at the very beginning? Just get started. Just get started. Really start to really hone in as to what that AI means, but even more so, what EQ means to you. How are you doing? You know what's non-negotiable is your ability to invest in your folks that you're affecting. That could be your friendships, your family, your colleagues, people around you, strangers around you. And it really has to do with the emotional side of things. So with that said, guys, what a show. And I thank Eric Pennington, again, one of the managing partners at Spirit of EQ, for being our guest. And look them up, guys, and just get started. This is Coach Dava. As always, be blessed and go be a blessing. Take care, everyone. We'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
And that wraps another episode of Challenging Your Status Quo. We hope you found inspiration and practical wisdom to carry into your daily lives. If JA has inspired you, join our community by subscribing to the podcast. Stay connected with us at latreacoaching.com and through our social media channels, where the conversation and growth continue. On behalf of JA and his whole team, we thank you for listening and invite you to keep challenging the status quo in your own life. Until next time, remember, pursue excellence, live purposefully, and embrace holistic success. We'll catch you next episode.